When you're in a position of leadership, the most important thing to do is lead with purpose. When you're placed in a position of leadership, I think what you need to do is you need to create a sense of belonging and you need to create a purpose and have a vision for people so that everyone's on the same page. When you have a sense of belonging, everyone is going to be more inclined to support the mission. When everyone has a purpose, they understand where they fall and how their particular role supports the overall vision of what you're trying to achieve. But if you have neither of that, then people are just there and they're not sure what their purpose is. And their purpose then may become just to get a job and I could go to the next place. So I think if you really want to establish a great workplace culture and have great leadership, those are the building blocks of it, is make sure you have vision, make sure everyone on the team has a purpose, and make sure that there's a sense of belonging for the team. And I think once you have those three things, then that's the foundation to start building everything else upon. Sometimes you're going to be faced with difficult decisions, and sometimes those difficult decisions are you may have to let someone go, or you may be breaking some bad news to them. And I think you have to respect the person that's going to be receiving the bad news. In my experience, what I've discovered is that you got to tell them right away. You got to rip the Band-Aid off and say, this is what it is, and I'm sorry. And I have some bad news. We're going to have to let you go. And it gives them enough time to sit down and process it versus the anxiety of going around the subject and this big song and dance to finally get to the point, which could frustrate them a little bit more. I think when you're making a leadership decision, and some of these decisions are very tough, and that's the responsibility of the leader, and you have to be able to deliver the decision across the board. So I like to take a Gestalt approach, and where I could go in and I could give the message once and everyone's going to hear it. And then once they've heard the message, then I'll open up the opportunity for questions and answers. So that way they could understand the why the decision was made. I think that's very important, especially in today's world where information is so rapid. The last thing you want one of your employees to find out is that your restaurant is closing, and they find out through social media or a local newspaper, and they'll be the last ones to find out. So I think you need to be upfront. I think you need to be transparent with your information, and I think you need to bring them direct, honest communication as quickly as possible. And sometimes you need to showcase the humility and say, I don't know, and let them know that you're human and that I don't know where we're going next, or I don't know why this decision was made, or I don't know why this is happening. If you truly don't know, and let them know that you don't know, but you're going to do everything in your power to get the answers for them as the information comes. When it comes to consistency, the saying is you have to inspect what you expect. And so if you want something to happen, and if you're measuring it, that's the only way that you could be certain that it's getting done correctly. So if something's important to you, you can't just leave it alone and think that I showed you once and it's going to get done. You, as the leader, have to make sure that you're making time to go back and follow up with your colleagues and make sure that they're doing something a certain way. In the case of the kitchen, we do line checks. So the chef's going to walk up and down the line, he's going to taste everything. And through that repetition of tasting something over and over and over again, you start to notice when there's a little subtle deviation. But if you taste it every day, that's the only way you're going to ensure the consistency. As a chef, sometimes I could walk down and I could just see something and say, that's wrong. And they'll say, how do you know? I'll say, because I made it 1,000 times. I could tell, I could smell it, the color's slightly off. And these are the little things that you pick up only by constantly checking in on things and constantly tasting things or constantly being exposed to something to recalibrate to make sure it's always right. And as long as people know that I'm around and I'm inspecting these things, then I think that's when you can start to expect consistency, because the standard has been established and that people understand that the standard is also going to be inspected. So a lot of people say, only practice what you preach. And I would say the reverse of that and say only preach what you practice. There's nothing worse than when you say something, but you don't do it. So if you know you're doing something and you're able to set the example, then preach about what it is that you're doing. That way people know that you're not only holding them accountable to something, but you're also holding yourself accountable to something. When the leader's work is done, the people look at each other and say, amazing, we did it ourselves. And I really aspire to be a leader like that, where you're involved, but you're not overly involved. You're teaching people to do it for themselves. So when they do have great success and they do have great accomplishments, that there's a sense that they could take with them that said, we did that, I did that. I'm able to say that I've overcome something versus he did it for me and I wouldn't have been able to do it without him. As a good leader, I think you really have to understand perspective. And the best way I could explain that is if you have someone that you work with, you might be able to pick up all their flaws, but you might not notice any of your own. And they might be able to pick up all your flaws. And I think it's important to have these conversations with them, because as a good leader, we're always so focused on us, and it's like the camera's pointing out. So I'm constantly watching that movie where you're constantly watching this movie. It's important to ask that other person, what do you see in me as a leader that I could do better? What do you see that I'm doing wrong? And get that feedback from someone that you trust, and be open to hearing things that you may not like, because you may be doing something that's frustrating your team, or you may be doing something, that's on autopilot that you're completely unaware of, that the rest of the team notices, but you don't, because you're constantly looking this way versus having some introspection. So I worked with someone where I was getting to the point where I was getting some regular press, and this person came up to me and said, "Hey, you were in the newspaper and you didn't even tell me." And I said, "Yeah, I'm over it." And they stopped me and they said, "And that's the problem we have with you right now, is that you're over it, but we're not. We want to celebrate. We want to say that we're proud to work for you, but you're walking around like you're too cool for school." And I thought to myself, it was good for that person to give me that feedback, because it allowed me to recognize that it might not have been important to me, or I might have been dismissive about certain things, but it was really important to them. And had they not brought that up, I would have been completely unaware of that.